Test, test, test. Okay. So we're good. Okay. This is good though. The levels are okay? Okay.
Sense, at first we thought we would fit into a classroom, basically. And then we thought, okay, we'll try to do like a fishbowl, where some of the academics who are here can be in a conversation and everyone else can participate in some way. But then when we saw there were 200 people, we said, forget it. So the way that we'll do this, again, is we have some reflections that two scholars are going to offer for us, and a brief response. We might have a little bit of time for back and forth, but then the last session of the day, what we're planning to do is move these chairs into circles. And so there will be time, depending on your topic of interest, to go in depth with each of the scholars who has presented, or on other topics. We'll see how many circles we would like to create, and so there will be time for more in-depth discussion. And so I would like to call up Gordon Davies and William Calvo. And Gordon is a biblical scholar who teaches at the University of Toronto, and is also here in this kind of focolare setting for the first time. So we're really thrilled that he's able to be with us. William is a force of nature who's really doing incredible scholarship at the University of Michigan, also in the Latino scholarship on the reality of Latinx in the world. And so Gordon will do about 15 minutes, and then we're going to keep this part to a half an hour, and then we're going to call up Dana and Giovanna for another topic. And so welcome.
Good morning. Morning. I'm pleased to be here, very pleased indeed. I'm feeling humbled after listening to Father Jesus so broadly, so beautifully about, as Amy was saying, the heights of contemplation. I'm going to shift perspective and speak, I'm afraid, very banally and practically about issues of immigration. If there's some context I can put it in, thank you. If there's some context I can put it in, it's that discernment ends up leading to practice, right? And discernment is not only for ourselves in our own spiritual lives, but for us as citizens in our country, for us as participants in the future of our country, dealing with the issues of the age. And one of the issues around the world, in the United States, Canada, and elsewhere, is migration. So how do we, as individuals, as communities, as nations, deal with the reality that people are on the move? How do we welcome the other? How do we change our own understanding of the other in order to be people, individuals, communities open to the world? And I'm going to be very practical, and for the practicality of it all, I apologize after the beautiful talks earlier this morning. My own background is that I have a doctorate in biblical studies. I taught theology in Toronto. I was tenured, actually. I taught theology for 10 years. In the Archdiocese of Toronto, which has 2 million people, most of whom were born abroad, Mass is celebrated in Toronto in 30 languages every day. I have had the tremendous fortune and pleasure of teaching newcomers to Canada about Canadian business practices and Canadian cultural practices, and particularly business people from China. I also now don't teach biblical studies full-time. I work at the Toronto School of, the School of Continuing Studies at the University of Toronto, where 45% of our students are newcomers to Canada, hoping to get a Canadian credential to advance their new lives in Canada. So I'm very involved with migrants, newcomers to Canada. Putting the issue of migration in the theological perspective, though, in line with Father Jesus and Peter's talks this morning, I'd invite you to think about the role, the theme of the land in Scripture, the Old Testament. Reflect for a moment on those biblical stories that we all more or less know. That Israel is in relationship to the Holy Land as being in the land and belonging to the land, but the land is never fully given to Israel. It is never fully secured. Its destiny, Israel's destiny vis-a-vis the land, is always in movement towards fulfillment. The land is promised to Abraham and his descendants. Then follows the false security of slavery in Egypt, away from the land. Then follows the desert experience out of Egypt in search of the land, the conquest of the land, the destructive power of kingship over the land that leads eventually to defeat, to exile for Israel, the loss of sovereignty over the land, and finally exile again. So the land is promised, but never fully secured. Jesus chooses homelessness during his ministry and never finds a home until the resurrection, when he opens for us the eternal home, the one home that is ours forever. So the land in Scripture is a promise, but it is also a place of judgment. It is a place where our own contribution to the other always weighs in the balance. The land is a place that we must learn to be worthy of, and it is God's gift to us. The USA and Canada are profoundly promised lands for people from around the world. Millions of people hope to make new lives for themselves in our countries. Both our countries were built on immigration. So despite the practicality of the topic, I'm not hesitant to put it before us today and to ask how creative faithfulness can be applied to this question of migration. How are we, Americans and Canadians, succeeding and failing to honor the gift of our lands? What is God saying to us in the phenomenon of newcomers to our lands? I'm very aware that our two countries, United States and Canada, have very different histories. And I certainly don't want to be here as a visitor in your great land and impose solutions or suggest that my country is in any way superior. We have very different histories. We may culturally seem similar, but in many ways we're very different, and I think that will come out in this talk. But I do think that comparisons can be useful. That discernment, again, as Father Jesus was saying, begins in contemplation, begins in self-understanding, but it needs context, history, facts, and today comparison in order to be put into practice. And that's what I'd like humbly to put before you today about the issue of migration. American commentators, whom I respect, suggest that in the US, the issue of migration has become a repository for a range of issues and anxieties. Father Jesus mentioned that we live in an age of anxiety. That's true in the USA and Canada. So migration, these commentators suggest, has become a locus for anxiety about nationalism, the place of the US in the world, the future of work and employment, the realities of white males without higher education, and very importantly in the US, anxieties about security. Immigration in Canada, on the other hand, is seen primarily as an economic reality. And I think it's pertinent that one parallel track in this conference this weekend is the economy of communion, right? So you're thinking already about economy. Canadians, not by being any more virtuous, but just by our history that I'll talk about in a minute, conceive that our future economy and our prosperity depends on immigration. We have a population that is shrinking without immigration. We know that our connectedness as a small trading nation, our connectedness to the international scene is strengthened by the immigrants who live among us, who can help us promote open trade. And open trade is currently a reality under threat. 80% of Canadians think that immigrants help the economy to grow. And there is growing confidence in Canada's ability to manage immigration and to screen refugees. A bit of history, and I'm not proud of this, but like the US, Canada had a racist and race-based immigration policy, in our case until 1967. It was specifically designed to keep out Asians and Blacks, and it was in our centennial year, actually 1967, that specifically race-based policy was dropped, I'm proud to say, and we stumbled upon a points-based system. It was under a conservative government, capital C conservative, one of the parties in Canada, that we switched to a point-based system that we have used since with a lot of alterations, and we favor economic immigrants over family-based immigrants. And we aim at high numbers. The current policy is to bring in 1% of our population annually. So this year's target for 2020 is 310,000 immigrants for a population of 37 million. That means, therefore, logically, 10% over a decade. That means currently that 20% of Canadians were born abroad, and 40% of Canadians are either immigrants or the children of immigrants. That's the highest in the G7. In my city, Toronto, which is Canada's largest city, 50% of the population was born abroad. I was talking with somebody from Los Angeles, where it's a similar figure. Overall, in the US, the figure is 13% born abroad. To qualify to come to Canada as an economic immigrant, one must have, at this point, higher education, and good language skills in French or English. Canada is a bilingual country. And those are tested before the immigrant arrives. In Canada, 60% of the newcomers are in this economic class, and 25% are in the family class. In the US, that's almost exactly the reverse. In the US, 65% are family class, that is brought in to join their family members already here, and 17% are economic. More about that comparison in a minute, and the moral discussion behind it. I'm aware it's also a moral question. A greater proportion of immigrants to Canada have university degrees than native-born Canadians do. That's unique in the world. Immigrants who come as children have a 2-year gap, and then they begin to outperform native-born children in school. Again, that's unique. We're the only jurisdiction in the world in which that is the case. Now, I'm very aware that there is a strong moral argument to be made for the preponderance of family class immigrants over economic immigrants. And I'm not at all suggesting that the US should shift to Canada's system that favors economic class immigrants. But the results are very different. And I'm just, as it were, putting them before you today for your reflection and for comparison, so that you can, as Americans, take action in whatever way you think is justified. And I'll have some modest suggestions at the end. Back to practicalities. How did Canada end up with this system? Again, I'm not proposing that we're more virtuous or we're more international or cosmopolitan. It's actually a random result. No, not random. It's a result of a reality in our history. Canada has always been two people, at least two peoples. In 1867, when the Fathers of Confederation, and they were all men, met to discuss and negotiate our moving from being colonies of Britain to an independent nation, they were two peoples in dialogue, the French and the English. French speakers in Quebec and English speakers elsewhere. From the very beginning of Canada, then, as a nation, we have been two peoples in dialogue, not always in friendship, and certainly in the 19th century, there was a great deal of tension between English Protestants and French-speaking Catholics. They did not agree socially, far less theologically, but for their political reasons, the Fathers of Confederation had to sit down and negotiate, and they did so. They did not, therefore, make utopian plans, as Peter suggested in the talk earlier today, are not practical. Instead, they had to negotiate and compromise. So Canada has always been a land of compromise in which people have had to deal with the other, whom they sometimes considered very alien. Some suggestions then before I close. I think a policy can be made, a moral argument can be made for open migration, that no one be illegal. But I would suggest that the churches in the United States and Canada are too tainted by the sexual abuse scandals for us to take a purist stance on any issue, especially one that is as sensitive as immigration. No discussion about immigration in the States, I'm told, can put aside the issue of security. So here are three, I think, practical but humble suggestions. The first, I think it would be useful if Americans began to clarify the three groups who are coming to your country: documented immigrants, undocumented migrants, and refugee claimants. There are three groups. They each have an argument to make for their presence. There are moral cases to support them all, social justice cases, but they're distinct. And we, non-Americans, when we read about the American discussion, think there's sometimes unclarity on that. So a call for clarity. Second, and I'll speak from my own patch as an educator, I think one way that Americans can contribute to the topic and the controversy about migration is through education. Educate the newcomers to your country. 43% of the people who come to the School of Continuing Studies are newcomers to Canada. I know there are issues about documentation when you register for higher education in this country and so on. Could dioceses put on adult education courses open to anyone, no official documents required, to give people that first leg up in creating a life for themselves, teach them skills? Last, contact. The miracle of contact, dialogue, as we've been talking about. Canada has stumbled on a system of private sponsorship for refugees. 2 million Canadians report that they have personally been involved in helping Syrian refugees settle in Canada since 2015. Small groups can sponsor refugees, and it involves a financial contribution and guarantees. But what this means, and there's a theological dimension to this, is that they're talking, they're dialoguing. The other ceases to be alien and becomes somebody you know, however different his life has been. And that leads to bonding, to friendship, to acceptance. So that ends my little talk. Thank you. I come as a visitor. Thank you for your very warm welcome. And I just put these thoughts out for your meditation, because I know that you Americans are people of action. You're really practical. And we in the rest of the world really admire that. So you're doing great things, and I hope that these sort of ideas have helped you in your own thoughts and your own plans for action. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. A few things that I just came to talk, and we only have 5 minutes. A few things I think is trying to discern really what God is telling us, humanity, as this global experience of migration is happening. You know, because tomorrow we'll see something that affects every country and every continent. A few things that I found very interesting here is the attention to land. I mean, land is a very interesting point of departure, because many of the conflicts that we have around the world have mobilized people outside that necessarily are based on religious conflict, but the access to land. And land, it has been one of the important components in the construction of the New World. I mean, the notion that we have about private land is something that is relatively new in human history. Most societies have associated the use of land as a collective. I mean, just to give you an example, when the NAFTA was constructed, one of the first provisions was a change in the Mexican Constitution against the ejido, which is a particular type of ownership who allowed for collective. You know, so the issue, for example, in Native Americans, it had to do with the contention about land. So the question of how do we relate to land, I think is going to be a very important, how do we move forward in terms of the relation that we have with migration. Now, a few things. I mean, it's interesting that you bring all these numbers, because it really, for me, one of the things that is important is how these two nations, who appear to be very similar at the beginning, have evolved into very two different models of the construction and relationship, or how do they imagine the project of the nation. You know, so I think that's interesting. And we were talking yesterday in how, for example, religion may have been one of those components on what kind of people have moved here in the first place when this project of creating America was put in, you know? So just for a few data, in the United States, the population is dropping. We have the lower growth in the last decades, and it follow a path, you know? Two other things, 42 states, including the District of Columbia, have a drop in the births of children last year. And you can imagine that only those states who have, and the south of the United States, have been the ones who have had increasing numbers and had to do with migration. At the same time, we have the lowest migration in 2016. So despite the anxiety that we see outside, we're having attracted less people, you know? So for me, another thing that I find very interesting that is so, I think when we were thinking about these days, why it was important to have the discussion about economy is because we cannot move forward in terms of a comprehensive understanding of migration if we don't understand how economy affect people and mobilize people. You know, so it's really a question about how do you define illegality? You know, what that means? How law is constructed? How law responds to different periods of time or different anxieties? Another thing that is interesting for me is to think even what is the complications of our economy model, you know? So that is who have access to get an education before they move to the new country. You know, so it may be that we need to, it's something that we're trying to figure out as a humanity, what that means. But it's something that it may be something in between. You know, how do we move that one? And then the other thing is, what is an investing as a nation in the United States in perpetuating illegality? You know, in the way the people are, there is not a reforming immigration, because part of a model of exploitation agreed fit into the need of people who do not have access to a valuable salary or healthcare access. You know, so not that we are responsible per se, but just to say that we are all trying to envision a world who is different. So the big question for us is, what kind of world we want to create, you know? And I really like the notion of contact, you know, because all the studies have shown that people, when they're in contact with other people, when migration and all the other social issues became about people that you know, your uncle, your cousin, your nephew, then people change their attitude. So a lot of the time, most of the fear that we may have about the other is based because we don't know the other. You know, so trying to work together and trying to figure out together what is next, it will be a good. So thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Sorry, it was very short. And tomorrow we will have an afternoon dedicated to migration, and we will have a huge discussion about many different aspects. And so there we will have a time to discern together what it may be next for us as a society. Thank you. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to both of you. What was coming to my mind is the line from the reflection that Jesus shared this morning, that when I speak, it is no longer I who speak, but I and Jesus and you and me. And so what came to my mind, and I had never thought of this before, that what Gordon was sharing, is that also the disciplinary work of comparison can be really understood in that key, so that when I speak, it is also I from a maybe US perspective, Gordon from a Canadian perspective, and then the work that we're doing together. So it's just a beautiful kind of insight for our work, our interdisciplinary work. And then the second thing, that this, the importance of contact also helps us with that dynamic, because it can't be I and you and me unless we also have that opportunity to know each other and build that trust. So thank you for setting the table also for our continued conversation this afternoon and this morning. And so this may kind of feel like appetizers at a party, right? And that's intentional, so that you see the kinds of topics that we would like to delve into and explore. It's a little taste here and a taste there, but each of these could be a full 3-day conference, and so which is what we hope to do with our work with the Focolare Forum for Dialogue and Culture, to create a setting where we can also explore more in depth with more conversation. So we are shifting gears again to an amazing world of thinking about the implications for these theological models for education. And there will be, for some folks involved in higher education, there's going to be a wraparound at St. Mary's University. But Dana Dillon, who teaches at Providence College, a Dominican college in Rhode Island, and a dear, dear friend of the movement who has helped us also on questions of polarization, we are so grateful that she's able to join us to offer some reflections also on the implications for Catholic education. And then she will be joined for, again, like William's role, by Giovanna Zander, who teaches at, is also a scripture scholar, teaches at Dominican College and also in Fordham's Graduate School of Religious Education, and also a wonderful help for our ongoing intellectual work also within the Focolare community for many, many years. So welcome to both of you, and thank you.
Is this in the right place? Can you hear me now? Hello, it's such a joy to be here. I'm just going to begin by saying I grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas. I now, thank you. I'm now exiled to the Great White North in Providence, Rhode Island. So it is such a joy to be back home in Texas. You're always a Texan if you're, a Texan, And I got to ride in a pickup truck today, so it really feels like home. I will say that, I heard Gordon starting off saying, I'm kind of an outsider coming to the Focolare to say a few things. I think I got away with that maybe 5 years ago when I gave a talk with the Focolare, but I do feel very much part of the family now, so I appreciate that very much. I also appreciate that Amy said it's just appetizers, because I'm looking at that my words got longer, my time is getting shorter. So I'm going to dive in and give you a little taste of this, and then give Giovanna some time, and we'll see where the Spirit leads it all. I will say that in listening to Father Jesus this morning and talking about that age of anxiety, I was thinking, Catholic education is living right now in an age of anxiety. There are smaller schools right now that each year they're wondering if next year is the year they will have to close their doors because they don't have enough enrollment. So many of us in Catholic higher ed, there are about 230 Catholic colleges and universities in the U.S. Some are big and safe. Places like Notre Dame, where it may be that football identity is more important than Catholic identity. Right? Yeah. I'm an alum of Notre Dame, twice over, so go Irish. But there are schools that are very secure because of other things that they do, and there are schools that are very insecure both because of their small size and some other reasons as well. But I think for most of us who work in Catholic higher ed these days, we have a lot of anxiety, whether it's about keeping the doors open or whether it's about engaging the question of what does it mean to be a Catholic college or university these days. And let me just give you a little picture of part of what that challenge looks like. If you went back certainly 60 years, but even 20 or 30 years, you would see that at most Catholic colleges and universities, most of the faculty, staff, administrators were Catholic and were pretty well catechized in their Catholic faith, and then came to their adult professional lives, whether that was a career in fields such as chemistry or biology, or one more like theology or philosophy. And they had a pretty good grounding in their Catholic faith. They got this adult formation in a field, and they were able to integrate those things pretty well, partly through the communities that they were part of, whether that was the university community or a parish community that had a lot of people who were also well formed in the faith. These days, less so. We have, at most of our Catholic schools, like most of the schools everywhere else, people go where the job is. I'm a case in point, right? I went where the job was. Now, for me, it was a job in a Catholic theology department, and I had my own formation in theology. But people go where the job is, and that means that we hire the best fit for the job in the chemistry department, or in the finance department, or in the history department or literature department. And those people, and let me just say, I'm not judging those particular faculty members. I want to say, if you are getting a doctorate in any of these fields, you are likely to be getting that training at a secular institution that gives you no real tools to integrate your approach to that field with theological claims or faith claims or anything like that. So that means that at a school such as mine, you have a few people in the liberal arts, the theology department, some of the philosophers, et cetera, who are well grounded and well integrated in their professional training and what they are teaching, and integrating that with a Christian worldview. The ways that our faith shapes how we see life and truth. For many of our colleagues, that's just not the case. They're not given the skills, and even more so for the students who are coming in. Again, some come in very well formed in faith. They come to our Catholic schools because they're looking for a Catholic education. But many of them come to our particular Catholic schools because it's near home, or because it's far from home, or because they got the right financial aid package, right? Or they're there because, well, for whatever reason it is, right? But I want to suggest to you that this sort of "here comes everyone" who's at our Catholic schools is actually an opportunity for us to really think about being a hearth for the human family as these young adults come to us. And there's a connection here to the vision of what a Catholic university should be. In Ex Corde Ecclesiae, which was St. John Paul II's document on Catholic higher ed, on Catholic universities, he says this. It's from number 21, if anybody likes to take notes on these things, but there's no test. A Catholic university pursues its objectives through the formation of an authentic human community animated by the Spirit of Christ. The source of its unity springs from a common dedication to the truth, a common vision of the dignity of the human person, and ultimately the person and message of Christ, which gives the institution its distinctive character. Now, just to unpack that for you a little bit, those are three things. First of all, the common dedication to the truth, which of course should be part of any university at all, but particularly for our Catholic schools. Also, a common vision of the dignity of the human person, and then finally the person and message of Christ. Now, for those of us who are believers and who are rooted in that Christian gospel, we know that these three are deeply intertwined with, right? Because Christ reveals what it means to be human. And Christ also reveals to us the God who is the Trinity, who has made us in God's image and likeness for union with God and for one another. Right, so all of these are wound together quite tightly. Now, I think this is particularly important for those of us who are in Catholic higher ed, who are committed to the Catholic mission of the college. Sometimes we can get distracted by our arguments, right? I will just also, as a side note, my friend who is here says, wow, this has such a different feel than academic conferences. Thanks be to God. We academics can, in fact, get so distracted by our arguments over the truth that we can be the worst witnesses ever to unity. And so this is what I am hoping to invite a little of your consideration. And again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. The focolare know this, but the key thing here is that when we think about who we're called to be as Catholic universities, we are called to be committed to a God who is truth and who is love. And we need to trust that God holds those together such that we never have to choose, let me soften the truth to show you love and unity, right? Or let me give up on love because the truth is so important. We actually have a call, a vocation in this world where too often we are polarized and reduced to sound bites. We have an opportunity to be a space where people are invited into deep intellectual inquiry and argument in the midst of different perspectives, and still be a space where we are an authentic human community, nurturing love as well as truth, holding those two together. And for me, I want to say that one of the crucial moments or crucial touchstones for me in this work is the work of Chiara Lubick. And in particular, when she talks about Jesus forsaken, for me, this is very important. Too often, again, as a theologian, I can focus on, Christ the teacher, right? That is who I'm connected to, and the word, Christ the truth. Let me stand clearly for truth. Yes, that's important. I don't want to water that down. But I think in the midst of our divisions and differences, and when it's so hard to talk well and clearly about these differences and to argue, what Chiara says about that moment, you all know she's so focused on Jesus forsaken and that moment, the cry. But here's what she says. It is the moment in which Jesus experiences the deepest separation that can ever be imagined. In a certain sense, he experiences being separated from his Father, with whom he is and remains one. In this way, he gives to all people a new unity, even more complete than the one that they had lost through sin. He gives them unity with God and among themselves as a participation in his unity with the Father and with us. He is therefore the key to the understanding and the accomplishment of unity. For me, this says that in the midst of our anxieties, in the midst of our fear, if I don't stand up for the truth, then who will do it? Jesus forsaken is a path for us to remember that the unity we have been promised is already accomplished. And if we commit ourselves to Jesus forsaken, if we embrace him as that moment of both love and truth, of that moment where all that divides us, all that confuses us, all that seems not whole about us, has already been brought into the life of the Trinity, who is love and who is truth, and who is our destiny, our now and our destiny. I just want to close on one quick note. There's so many things that I thought I might say that I skipped, but I think that this path of love and of truth is one that really offers our students something new, something different, something that we can offer. And I'm just going to tell a story. So, of course, this has been the first week of classes. at Providence College. And on the second day of a class that I teach, I had the students write a little reflection. Come in and tell us what you bring and why you're taking this class, and a little bit about why you came even to Providence College. So there was a young man who shared that he transferred to Providence College from a state school. I won't name the state, but let's just say it's not Texas. But his experience there, and he identified day one of class, and he identified as a gay young man. And part of what he said, though, was he felt lost in the sea at that state university. He did not feel seen. He's now been at Providence College for a year and a half, and he says, not everybody agrees with me here, but I feel like everybody I've encountered here values me and sees me, even if they want to disagree with me. And that's why I'm thrilled to be here. Again, I think there are all kinds of debates that we need to have as a church about how best to address all kinds of issues, including LGBTQ inclusion in our parishes, our schools, everywhere. But of course, one of the great things that this student has already gotten is, those debates aside, I know I am loved and valued here. And if we can do that for every member of our communities, then we can also have an authentic argument about where we're called to live faithfully in today's world. And we can support our young people, our next generation, in engaging those arguments, both for love and for truth. Thank you. Mostly on script, kind of.
Thank you very much, Dana. This was really insightful, thought-provoking. I'm here to, as we say, to stir the pot. So I hope you don't mind if I ask some hard questions.
All unity in the midst of that. It's perfect.
Just because I don't want the, this whole thing to be tilted on too much positivity.
There's one in every crowd.
Because we did, start this by saying that we experience division, polarization, and this is something that is certainly true in the academic world as well, among the students and faculty, faculty and administration, faculty and with each other, and not just because Catholic higher institutions are, let's say, more diverse in their degree of Catholicity, but also because I guess people who study tend to grow a bigger ego. I don't know if you agree with that. And also to be maybe more on the side of seeking truth than also living love. So here are some questions that you could entertain even later today if you want, or maybe ask our experts here. The fact that we live in a polarized world and academic world, and that we end up being in sort of bubbles or echo chambers where we only listen to people who think like us and sort of dismiss people who don't. This seems to be at odds with the shared pursuit of truth that we embark on in universities and other places. So there are two sides of this question. How would you engage those who are or seem to be unwilling to entertain a different position? Or conversely, what if you're the one who feels hesitant, let's say, to engage with others who you presume they're not going to be conversation partners, let's say, or willing to dialogue. What do you do when there's this sort of crystallization of positions? And you may have already, given that part of that answer, but also thinking of, we were saying this morning, many times you underscore the social aspect of human beings, the fact that we are all in the same human condition. And I wonder if universities, or even how we could pursue this aspect of our own interconnectedness more. And I'm inviting here not just ideas, but also experiences, because sometimes, many times, being a biblical scholar, we learn from history, our own personal and our community history. So experiences are just as important, because those are places where God speaks as well. Okay, I love what you said about the relationship between knowledge and then truth and love. I wonder if anyone else experiences a difficulty in universities and colleges where there's that anxiety. Are we going to be around next year? Do we have enough enrollment? How is retention? How much do I have to write to get tenure and promotion? We're, pulled in so many different directions. How do you keep the focus on that knowledge, truth, and love? Finally, my last one, I had more, but you touched upon the topic of balance between identity and inclusion, welcoming, but also being faithful to the truth. And this is so complicated today because identities are such a fluid concept. They could be social, they could be economical, they could be racial, they could be ethnic, they could be a lot of students saying, I'm spiritual but not religious, so you don't even have that to address. So I'm very interested in, I guess, hearing how different institutions deal with this very difficult balance between identity and inclusion.
Minutes to respond. All right. Wow, 2 minutes. Where to?
To begin.
To begin. Okay, so let me say one thing when you're talking about what to do with the crystallization of positions. I will tell you that where I have been most successful in this was completely unplanned, but sort of an opportunity that presented itself. Longer story, very short. In 2013, someone at my campus invited someone to come. His name was John Corvino. He was going to argue for same-sex marriage. The administration said, not unless someone responds who defends the Catholic teaching on marriage. Otherwise, we cancel it. So I agreed to respond. They canceled it anyway. Took 9 months, and then it happened. But one of the interesting things about that, now understand this. I had publicly said, yep, I will stand up and defend what the church teaches on marriage. Then they canceled it. You know who became my best friends that year? Not the theology department. I got lectures on moral cooperation with evil. But the LGBTQ community at my campus. They, even though they knew I was going to stand up and not say exactly what they wanted to hear, they knew I was willing to stand up in a conversation about them that was important to them in a way that I ended up, I mean, now those students have since graduated and what have you, but I was in that community in a way that I couldn't have planned, right? It was the Holy Spirit had something going. I mean, I said yes when I was asked, but I could not have put myself in those relationships if I had tried, but they were given to me. So that's one thing, is kind of an openness. Look for, stay in dialogue, in truth and in love, and you'll be surprised what the Spirit offers to you, I think. And the other thing that I will say, even as I said that last, is I feel like my personal life has been a long, long journey of, do I tell my friend the truth here or the loving thing? Do I, like, that I make it sound like, oh, we get to do both. Yay, you know, a God who is three and one, a God who is love and truth. Sometimes these things can feel that contradictory because we feel the path to one and not the other. Again, I say, we have, like, often the loving thing is, I think, the low-hanging fruit on the tree, or the truthful thing is the low-hanging fruit on the tree. I think we have to believe in a God who is both, in such a way that if we trust in that and look a little higher on the tree, we see the path forward, the piece of fruit that is both love and truth in that moment. And again, it's not easy. I know I just made it sound all nice and easy. Just look for another piece of fruit. It'll be there. And yet, isn't that what our God, who is love and truth, has promised us? It's not easy. Sometimes it leads through the cross and right to the moment of the cry. Taken. And yet, if we look for Jesus forsaken, if we stay committed to God, who is both love and truth and has already embraced us and that other in the unity of the Trinity, then, I mean, and if on our Catholic college campuses, we can't look for that and seek for that and work for that, then where can we? And I would say, we could say the same thing about our Catholic hospitals or Catholic social services or our Catholic parishes too. We ought to be able to create these spaces for those of us who believe in this God. We ought to be able to create those spaces for ourselves and for those who serve and those we are in community. Again, not easy, but the promise is there.
Thank you to both of you. I think this was more than an appetizer, right? this was like a steak, right? Or a veggie burger, whatever you can choose. But what came to my mind is the last line from the text that we read of Chiara, of that we have to that this life makes us all active and all passive. And so we put everything that we can into that search, into that hope, into that effort, into building these relationships. But we know that unity is not something that we do or we make, right? Unity is a gift. And so this sense of the courage to also be receptive and in a certain sense passive, in the sense of you waiting for the opportunity that came because of the circumstances. And so so it's a tremendous gift what you both, the very hard, and this is what we'd love to do, right? These hard-headed questions that we open out and have the courage to explore together. So again, the session after lunch will be all together here. And then the session after that, we're going to create small enough discussion groups on topics of interest, and it could also be based on languages that you prefer. So there are some people who would like to go to the daily mass, and so I think that's at 12:10. So you probably have to scoot in that direction. Those who would like to proceed directly to lunch may also do so. So we'll be back together, notwithstanding what Carlos said. We will be back here together on time at 1:45. Thank you very much.
Carlos overruled. So